everybody, welcome back. I'm glad you could join me today again for another adventure in the American desert Southwest, where we are exploring everything from the tall, wow, to the small. Past the teddy bear cholla, doesn't really live up to its name. And through the washes, so come along, because today we're talking about the giant saguaro cactus. This tall member of the cactus family can't be missed. Found in the American Southwest in Arizona, it can be seen at low elevations in the desert all the way up to several thousand feet elevation. The bulk of saguaros grow in the southern part of Arizona, where it's warm and arid. We don't find quite as many as we begin to move up in elevation. They prefer places like hills, plains, and rocky slopes, preferring well-drained areas. At the northern part of their range, they can be found on south-facing hillsides, where the morning sun quickly rises ambient temperatures above freezing. And in the warmer zones, they will grow at ground level, but they prefer a rocky substrate on which to grow for anchorage. The saguaro cactus is a great example of a plant that is dependent on precipitation patterns. Saguaro seeds depend specifically on summer rains to germinate. So, that is why we don't find saguaros in places like Southern California. These big guys can get really tall, like up to 50 feet tall. They also weigh a ton. Most people don't realize how much these things weigh until, say, an arm or an entire cactus falls. Look at this, a baby saguaro. Now, baby saguaros often grow under the shelter of vegetation. Like in this case, this one's growing under this Palo Verde tree. And there's even a smaller one down here. Now these younger saguaros, especially this little guy down here, will have different spines than the older mature ones. The younger one's spines are more heavy and darker. But as they age, the spines get more of that like bristly, lighter look to them. Which brings us to yet another fascinating thing about saguaros, how they age. Saguaros can get really old, like well over 100 years old. Research has shown how saguaros age disproportionately over the decades of their life. This has been shown like in this chart, this Steenberg low growth curve, with saguaros plotted on it from a 2016 National Park Service study. They start off really slow, like an inch in the first decade. But the next 20 years or so, growth takes off, and they can reach 1 to 3 feet by age 30. And then, it only takes about 20 more years to reach in the 3 to 10 foot range. Only after age 50 might a saguaro bloom, and it might be until age 100 that they branch an arm, when the cactus is well over 15 feet tall. Those big, iconic, multi-armed saguaros, the symbol of Sonora, are well over 100 years of age, and over 30 feet, even up to 50 feet tall, at which point growth tapers off. Another difference between these younger saguaros is that you won't find any flowers growing on top of these. That might not happen until the saguaro grows up to age 50, at which point flowers bloom on top of the cactus, both on the central stem and on those arms. Let's take a closer look at saguaro flowers. These flowers will bloom at night. They're actually pollinated by bats. Now, because they bloom at night, the flowers will be a whitish color to be seen and very fragranced to attract pollinators. The flowers bloom sometime around May to June. Now, just a few weeks following the end of the flower season comes the fruits. The fruits are sort of a greenish-reddish tinge on the outside, and on the inside you find a pulpy, fibrous substance that's edible. It's a bright red, delicious, very sweet substance, and you can eat that and the seeds. These fruits have sustained desert animals, desert dwellers, and desert people for a very long time. The hard part is getting to the fruits. on top of these cactus. We'll talk about that more when we dive a little deeper into foraging saguaro cacti fruit. Sometimes saguaro cacti will even grow in clusters like these guys. And on the top of that guy in the middle there, I can see a previous year's bloom. If we look on the ground here at the base of these saguaros, we can see remnants of previous year's blooms and fruits. This is all that's left, is this hard brown thing that is off the very top of the cactus that sits there for a little while and then eventually falls to the ground.
And did you know that saguaro cacti actually have bark on their trunks?
To go along with their woody trunk, saguaro cacti actually have this internal structure. We can check it out by looking at this dead saguaro here. All that's left now, all the fleshy stuff's gone, and we're left with this spindly wood from the internal skeletal-like structure that it has. The saguaro cactus is an extremely important part of the desert ecosystem. Bobcats have been known to sit on the branches, and birds find homes in the saguaros too. Woodpeckers like Gila woodpeckers and gilded flickers will drill homes into the central stem and branches of the saguaro. Once they're done with these homes and they abandon them, elf owls and other birds might move in and set up a home base. Now, saguaros have an interesting way of dealing with these holes put in them by animals. They actually heal themselves similar to the way that we scar up. They get a bark lining in the hole. And this lining is preserved in a type of cast that Native Americans were able to collect and use as a type of container created by nature. Here's one of those containers right there. This was the bark-like lining in a saguaro that was created. And as you can see then, you just have the cast of the old animal's home. Pretty cool. If you've never had a chance to actually touch a saguaro, it's pretty incredible. It has a somewhat fleshy but mostly tough layer to it. And this is actually a succulent plant. It stores massive amounts of water in here so it can weather out those drought periods. Saguaro is even growing in the shelter of a larger saguaro and this creosote bush. It's actually pretty cool. I'll get around here and try to show you some more of it. Look how it's just intertwined in there in the bush, the creosote bush, and right next to this larger saguaro. Wow. Baby saguaros are becoming more rare, possibly the result of climate change, especially drought, in combination with some historic factors. A 2016 study in Saguaro National Park revealed that of 10,000 saguaros surveyed, only 70 were less than 15 years of age, or under 0.1 meters or 4 inches in height. Now, further studies reveal that this is primarily due to a couple of factors such as wood cutting historically, and as we know, that reduces the shelter for the young saguaro seedlings who need that shelter to take off, like our guy here under this Palo Verde tree. Also, historic cattle grazing has put a lot of pressure on the land and promoted the growth of invasive species. And now climate and a prolonged drought in the southwest is only adding to the issue. If the baby saguaros don't have enough water, especially in these flat, low-lying areas, then they won't be able to take off. And the reduction of water also, again, promotes invasive buffalo grass, which competes with these plants and increases the risk of fires. Unlike trees like big sequoias, saguaro systems are not built on an ecology around fires. And saguaros have responded in some pretty interesting ways to environmental pressures. For instance, meet the crested saguaro. This is due to a mutation that causes a kind of fanning growth by uncontrolled cell growth in a wrong direction. Other mutant cactus also exist out there that look like they're undergoing some sort of hypergrowth. The cause of this mutant cacti is not conclusive, but likely due to environmental triggers like frost, pollution, or other climate factors. Here are some images of those mutant cacti that I've seen.
But how will saguaros respond to future pressures from climate change? Well, we already know that fires will be a problem and have already been a problem due to bufflegrass and added heat. On top of that, there's changes in precipitation patterns. In 2020, there was no monsoon, which is especially important for those younger saguaros. In fact, there was only about 1.6 inches of rain as opposed to the typical over 6 inches. While saguaros can certainly deal with heat and the occasional drought, even thrive in some of these conditions, not all plants will fare well with the changes, especially those nurse plants, like the Palo Verde tree under which our young saguaro needed to grow. Then there's the question if saguaros will employ a method that many plants are, and that's moving up in elevation. But if they do that, they move into the grassland environment, which just means more increased risk of fire and of freezing. There are some signs of trouble out there. We already talked about the fact that there's less baby saguaros being counted. And on top of it, in 2021, there was this pattern of funky blooms. The saguaros were blooming flowers down the stems on the side rather than at the tops and tips of arms. Why did they do this? Well, likely some sort of distress, possibly the lack of the monsoon in the previous year. But there's more. The flowers also bloomed in the fall, which is atypical as they usually bloom in the summer. And this is not a good time for saguaro blooming because it does not promote germination. Is this the saguaro's call for help, a last-ditch effort before succumbing to the unbearable changes? Well, we know on one hand that climate change is unprecedented at this point. But we know on the other hand that saguaros are hardy and incredibly adaptive plants, so I guess we'll have to see.
They do scoop out really easily. And again, then you can just eat them as is.